Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. In the wake of the crash between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen at the Austrian Grand Prix, Lando made the comment that he would lose respect for Max if he didn't apologise for the incident. Rumours are now emerging that the pair of them have potentially had some talks over the incident to try and clear the air, but based on certain information, it is not exactly clear at all that things have been cleared up going into the Silverstone Grand Prix, Norris's home race. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, this is the Williams livery for this weekend. They've done something like this a couple of times now, but a Silverstone Union Jack inspired. I think it's got a load of like names on as well. Livery for this upcoming weekend. Looks pretty cool as far as I'm concerned. Hopefully it'll be a bit faster than it has been for the last couple of rounds. Driver market update as well, just quickly. Teo Porcher, current Formula 2 champion, had all the IndyCar drama recently with Arrow McLaren, if you guys saw that one going on, but apparently he could well return to Sauber. He was a Sauber driver when he won the Formula 2 championship, and there were talks about him potentially joining that team. Now it may be possible, but still I would say a relatively outside possibility. Alpine, though, are being adamant they want Carlos Sainz, and the big talk has been with Alpine that over the last couple of weeks they have been feeding around the idea they may basically sack off their engine project and start buying engines in elsewhere. Latest rumours are they might buy Mercedes engines. Now, difficult to say whether they'd get that deal done, but of course, given the fact that Aston Martin is moving to Honda, Mercedes might say, hey, you know, we can supply another team with engines. Now, it's pretty embarrassing for Alpine, but if you're a driver, does that make Alpine a more attractive prospect? Their car right now actually isn't that bad. They're losing lap time in just pure engine performance, and yet they're still putting up points. So if you're Sainz and you've got Williams, who maybe they're making progress, but it's going to take a few years to see that. Obviously Audi, who knows what they're going to do, but certainly next year is going to be bad in the 2025 Sauber, kick Sauber, whatever you would think. So if you're Sainz, do you take the Alpine opportunity, given that they might have Mercedes engines, and therefore be a pretty competitive prospect in 2026. Who knows what the future holds, but apparently Flavio Briatore, now advising the team, is trying everything to get Sainz's signature, so that to me now seems like possibly the more likely possibility going into next season. Speaking of engines, this was a big confirmation though today from Aston Martin. They have announced that Andy Cowell, now he was the man given lots of credit for the dominant Mercedes 2014 hybrid engine in the V6 era when the turbo hybrids first came around. He led Mercedes engine department during its domination until basically 2020. He exited Formula 1 and now he's back as the CEO of the Aston Martin group, replacing ex-McLaren boss Martin Whitmarsh in the role. So this is actually a really big deal, right? Because Andy Cowell was given a lot of credit for what Mercedes achieved in that era. He's now joining a team that is partnering with Honda. Of course, arguably right now, they have the strongest engine. They're going into 2026 with Aston Martin, the brand new wind tunnel, the brand new setup. And yes, Aston have regressed over the last couple of seasons since the giddy heights they had, let's say, at the start of 2023. But the bounce back is intended for 2026, and this is one of those big moves, in addition to Enrico Cardile, who has been at least rumoured to be leaving Ferrari as their technical director to go and join Aston Martin. They are making some big moves, Aston, and you've got to wonder what this also means for the whole Adrian Newey angle, because this does make Aston a more attractive prospect, but obviously with the departure of the Ferrari technical director, possibly, there's been talk that maybe Newey there makes sense as well, even though Aston have absolutely approached Newey as well. So expecting big confirmations over the next couple of weeks here, but yeah, Aston are proving that they do mean business, despite some serious regression, it's got to be said, over the last 18 months or so. Speaking of engines, Helmut Marko has had a few things to say, and actually a lot to say, as he always does. We'll get into that in a second. He actually said, guess who is spreading such rumours on the, let's say, the performance of the Red Bull 2026 engine? There's just been a general feeling among the press. You know, I wouldn't even say there's a specific source I would point at, but it's just been talk from the Italian press and from around the world, really, of Formula 1, that the Red Bull engine project isn't expected to be as strong as the Mercedes, you know, the Ferrari, possibly the Honda, and maybe that's just a theory, because Red Bull haven't made their own engines before in this way. They're partnering with Ford. There's questions there on, you know, what the strength is going to be on the hybrid, the electrical side. And of course, you've got comments from Horner and Max in recent months suggesting that they're not very happy with the engine, you know, proposals for 2026. They wanted some changes, reducing the importance of the hybrid side. None of that's happening. And Toto Wolff is saying, yeah, no way, we're changing anything. We're love and life type thing. So, you know, there's been a general feeling from what people have said and implications indications that the Red Bull project might not be quite as strong. But of course, the other reason to say this, if you're another team, is to try and lure Max away, right? Obviously, Toto Wolff is going to make it very clear that their engine's looking really good and all this, and downplaying the performance potentially on the Red Bull side. Red Bull are going to try and ensure Max wants to stay. So this is what Marko says. Guess who is spreading such rumours? We are right on schedule. So, whether you think it's Zach Brown, whether you think it's, members of other teams that are circulating these rumours, intrigued your perspective in the comments section below. And Toto is still being very clear in the media, even today, that yes, Max is his target for next year. Whether he gets him, whether Max leaves, that is another point of debate. But Mercedes do have some reason to be optimistic. They won the race, of course, at the weekends. They also brought a new upgrade to their car, as we can see here. They just made some slight changes to the beam wing that, every single race, they tend to bring something a little bit new, which is helping their car get a little bit faster. And obviously, George wouldn't have won without the crash between Norris and Verstappen, but he was within, 13, 14 seconds of the lead, which for Mercedes over 60 lap race or so, and basically 60 laps into the race, that, we're talking 2.5 tenths of a second a lap, which to be fair, isn't that bad given where Mercedes were here last year, which was terrible, absolutely nowhere. So they've clearly made good progress, Mercedes. They're a couple of tenths off actually fighting with the pace of the front runners, and maybe on certain tracks they can get there more consistently. Hamilton did have damage, by the way. Toto Wolff talked about this. There was damage, of course, to the side pod that we saw caused by Lando Norris's debris actually at the end of the Grand Prix, so that didn't help. But also Hamilton's first lap contact with Sainz that basically, pushed him off the track or whatever. It was a racing instance. Hamilton eventually gave the position back, but he, by riding the curb as he did, got floor damage, broke off a load of parts, and they reckon was about 2.5 tenths a lap, which pretty much covers the delta between Hamilton and Russell during the Grand Prix. And, imagine had Hamilton not got the damage, got the move done on Sainz successfully, who knows whether, George and Hamilton have a big battle for third, and all of a sudden, someone else takes the race victory, right? But of course, that was not to be. Russell was able to capitalise. Ferrari as well, they have upgrades on the way, potentially rather good ones because, they say they're good. We'll see about that. High-speed bouncing, this has been their problem. They brought the upgrade to the Spanish Grand Prix, and it worked in terms of increasing their performance in the slower speed corners. But unfortunately for Ferrari, it's introduced bouncing in the higher speed corners. So they have things in the works to resolve this, and the plan is to actually bring that slightly forward. Not sure that's going to arrive this weekend in Silverstone, although of course historically pretty good circuit for the Ferrari drivers. Leclerc has had some great races here. Sainz won here of course back in 2022 in the Ferrari F1 75. So maybe there are reasons why Fred Vasseur has been talking about the optimism that he has on this team right now, but whether that will actually come true we shall see, because over the last 5 race weekends Ferrari are the lowest point scorer of the big 4 teams. McLaren at 144, Mercedes scored more points than Red Bull over the last 5 race weekends, and then Ferrari are in 4th place at only 104, and over the last 3 race weekends that looks very different. Basically since Monaco it's been a bit of an absolute disaster. But let's talk about this drama then, because this is not going away, especially because there's another Grand Prix in just a couple of days time. Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen, good friends off the track for many a year. Even Max made the comment in Miami, well, if I was going to lose the race, I'm happy that it was Lando winning because they're good friends. However, we have seen this story plenty of times in the history of Formula 1, even in, let's just say the last decade. Hamilton versus Rosberg, childhood friends, did everything together at some point, got along very well indeed, and then the championship battles they have, completely destroyed their relationship to such an extent that sometimes, it doesn't seem like one another wants to admit the other one still exists. So, the story at Hamilton-Rosberg, and it's a little bit different story here because they're fighting in different teams and all that type of stuff. But nonetheless, there is no doubt in my mind, or anyone's mind really, that on-track drama when you're fighting for a championship can contribute to consequences in off-track relationships. And then, of course, if Norris and Verstappen's friendship starts to become somewhat stretched, then maybe their actions on track become even more controversial and potentially exciting for us watching from home. So we know what happens at the end of the Grand Prix. I don't really want to go too much into the incident anymore. I know there was obviously talk about how much I think Verstappen was at fault. Most people kind of agree. The question is how much, how bad really was it? Because Norris had room to move over to the left-hand side if he wanted to, but, he had no obligation to because he'd taken his line for the corner. Max was the one moving under braking as far as the stewards saw it. They made contact. And also for Norris, he tried the move on the inside a couple of times. And a couple of times he'd either made a big dive bomb and overshot it. One dive bomb, which arguably was successful, kind of Abu Dhabi 2021 lap 1-esque, Hamilton on and Verstappen on Hamilton at that Grand Prix. And then, of course, there was the first time when Verstappen moved really rather late under braking, cutting Lando off, and then he had to go to the outside. So, Norris tried what he thought it was going to take to get into the lead, and eventually, I guess he had to realise, look, if Max wants to make contact, we're going to make contact, and let's see how that one turns out. So anyway, Norris had to retire. Verstappen got some points in the end, despite the 10-second penalty, and the Austrian, that is Helmut Marko, was giving his comment on the situation. It was pathetic how Norris behaved on the radio, but these things happen, and I would write off as a racing incident, although more likely Norris went over his limits. When asked about the whole episode, he said, definitely a lack of experience on Norris's part. To Marko, McLaren's driver's remarks were not conducive to re-establishing the peace, saying Norris's comment that Max should apologise really doesn't help, but they will meet for a chat, right? Because that's what Norris said, criticised Max quite heavily, said that, look, if he doesn't admit any fault for that, I'm going to lose respect, implying effectively that it's going to affect their friendship right outside of the situation on track. And even there was this comment further in the article on the fact that the pair of them actually flew home separately, which maybe shouldn't be a massive surprise, but it is interesting nonetheless. They normally fly together because they're boys, but this time they travelled separately, so Max had a quiet flight back. So it seemed like maybe Lando was due to fly on, Max's plane back to the UK, presumably for the Silverstone Grand Prix coming up this weekend, but no, Norris decided that no, he was going to travel back separately and did not want to share a flight with Max after the Grand Prix. Now look, things may have changed over the last couple of days with the tensions maybe boiling down somewhat, but Red Bull are absolutely not going to back down from this, right? Like Christian Horner was very adamant actually in an interview with Sky Sports today that, look, Max ain't going to change. This is who Max is, this is how he drives, and this is what you can expect. Now, he did say they've spoken already, so Max and Lando apparently have at least, had a discussion about it. I can't imagine that everything is now magically resolved, no problem at all, and it's going to go on and be very cordial. I'm sure that in the pre-race interviews, they're going to say, yeah, okay, we had a chat about it, we resolved it, Max said this, Lando said that, whatever, we want to move on and not talk about it anymore. But then, what if Max puts it P1 and Lando puts it P2 in the qualified for the race this weekend, and they go into cops at 180 miles an hour? Then, we've seen what potentially could happen there before. So, basically Horner says he ain't going to change. I don't think there's an issue from Max's side, at least an issue with Lando. It was interesting what Max said after the race, because initially on the radio and stuff he was blaming Lando, then presumably he saw a replay and, maybe felt like it was more of a racing incident. I don't know, because it felt like Lando was the one that wanted the apology, not the other way around, let's say. And look, this is just how Max drives, right? Like, this is what you'd expect from Max. Very tough racer, and the majority of the time it works for him, right? And it's interesting how obviously Max gets criticised today for some of these decisions, as did the likes of, Senna or Schumacher back in the day, but those were also other drivers, Schumacher especially on many occasions, and Senna also, it falls into part of this club that absolutely will not yield under effectively any circumstances, and often those drivers in hindsight are praised for the way that they drove. Now, like, the driving standards of today arguably should be different, maybe literally are different based on the letter of the law, which is why there's maybe more debate now on Max's driving than there was back then, but it's an interesting debate to be had, and as Horner goes on to say, there's an element, I think, of Lando learning how to race Max. They are just discovering that, because to be fair, Lando hasn't had much experience racing at the front of the field with Max Verstappen in a duel for the win, and when you get into that scenario, as Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Raikkonen, Sebastian Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo, among many others, have found out over the last few years, it ain't easy to beat Max. Max makes it very difficult to beat him. So Horner goes on to say, I understand that the two have spoken already. I don't think there's going to be an issue, but no doubt the tension had been building, and let's say the tension got to an absolute maximum at the Grand Prix in Austria. How much has it cooled down over the last couple of days? Maybe 20%, maybe 30%, maybe they've had a chat about it, but you know full well that if they find themselves next to each other on track, going into Stowe, going into with cops going into, Brooklands, whatever, at the Silverstone Grand Prix this upcoming weekend, you can be sure that it's going to get rather feisty. Of course, I'm hoping that we do again have a good battle between the pair of them, potentially for the race win. We'll see how the Grand Prix turns out. Obviously, Red Bull Racing are ready to, catch the vitriol, let's say, of maybe the home crowds after what happened, last weekend's. However, Red Bull may just run away with it. And this is kind of one of the questions, especially after what happened in Singapore last year, where Max failed to win. Of course, the Red Bull wasn't good there. He came, was it fifth in the end, fifth, sixth? I think it was fifth in the end at Singapore last year. Next weekend in Japan, he basically said, all right, I'm going to absolutely destroy this field and show that all the trash talk was not deserved. And that, of course, is exactly what he went on to do. So Red Bull are bringing Max Verstappen, who's a rather important piece of the puzzle for Red Bull, and some upgrades to their car. So Helmut Marko says they are hitting back in Silverstone with upgrades on the way. To be fair, though, I would expect lots of teams to bring upgrades. Some teams will have kind of brought some upgrades forwards that they would usually bring to Silverstone. There was a rumour that Ferrari had effectively brought 80% of their upgrade package in Spain that they were going to bring in Silverstone, but so maybe there's a little bit more to come for them. Probably Mercedes, McLaren would have something, just because it's such a home track for like every Formula 1 team, most Formula 1 teams at least, that are based nearby Silverstone somewhere in the UK. Milton Keynes for Red Bull, Brackley and everything for Mercedes. You guys know the drill, but there will be upgrades for Red Bull to try and strike back at McLaren. But to be fair, they said that in Imola when they brought an upgrade there, but still there was a big battle towards the end of the Grand Prix between Lando and Max again for the race victory there. The good thing is, of course, for Max though, that despite the drama, he still extended his championship advantage. It was actually 81 points after last year's Austrian Grand Prix. It is 81 points after this year's Austrian Grand Prix as well. Now, I don't expect the gap this year though to, exacerbate as it did last year. Mainly because last year, his P2 challenger at this point in the season was Sergio Perez. This year is Lando Norris, and that is creating for a very different set of circumstances because Perez is not delivering a great set of results. I mean, this is points scored in the last 3 rounds. Haas have scored 12. Perez has scored 11. So, yeah, definitely could be better. There was just one quick final comment here on the whole Max drama from none other than Toto Wolff, the man at Mercedes that is trying his best to get Max to drive for his team. And look, obviously Max made the comments that, I'm going to stay at Red Bull. But as we talked about, he could have been a little more emphatic and explicit in what he said than he chose to be. And as Toto says, he couldn't say anything else, could he? Like, he's not going to say, oh no, I'm leaving Red Bull. They had to press him pretty much for the answer. Asked if he would put his hand in the fire for Verstappen to drive for Red Bull in 2025, he says, I would put my hand in the fire for Max to drive Formula 1 next year. So once again, Toto trying his best to rile up all these stories around the possibility of Max departing. And look, Red Bull, maybe they have the fastest car, maybe they don't. There's a matter for debate on that, depending on how good you think, the McLaren is and all this stuff. Look, Max had a comfortable advantage this weekend, but not comfortable enough that one bad pit stop and arguably some poor strategic decisions, which is rare for Red Bull, allowed Lando back into the race. But over the last few races, it's been touch and go whether Max is going to win or not. So Toto can make a case to say, hey, look, Max, you might be so good that you've got a couple of tenths on every driver on the field in a car that maybe isn't the best right now. How about you come to Mercedes and do the same thing? Because we're close to where you guys are in terms of performance. But very much interested your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.